Hello, my name is Todd Bigelow. I'm a freelance photographer based in Los Angeles for the last 30 years, working with editorial, corporate, and nonprofit clients. I'm an adjunct professor of photography and photojournalism, workshop founder, and author of the Freelance Photographer's Guide to Success Business Essentials. This is just a short video series where I talk about business topics for freelance photographers. Hope you enjoy. Hey everyone, thanks for stopping by. Lately there's been some talk about higher education, attending universities, the cost compared to the benefits. And I want to jump on that because I've talked about this before. I talk about it with my students. I talk about it in my workshop. I definitely have a deep respect and passion for higher education. My wife and I, along with my son, who worked throughout his entire collegiate experience. We just put him through school. He worked extremely hard. He got done in 4 years in undergrad and 2 years in grad because we paid attention to, the cost of the education and getting him through the program as quickly as possible and into his career, which he is, not photography or anything, but at the most, in the most cost-effective way. And it worked out beautifully. But let's talk about photography and photojournalism, okay? First thing I want photography students or photojournalism students, undergrad or grad, to consider is obviously the average salary that you can reasonably expect to make. Especially coming right out of school. That's really important, okay? So you can find that information. You do a little bit of research online, U.S. Department of Labor Statistics, which is U.S. Bureau of Labor, Department of Labor. That information is listed. They update every year regarding, average salaries for a particular profession and so forth. And you can do, a little bit more research and find that information. But suffice it to say, it's not a high-paying field, particularly photojournalism, okay? I think if you come out of school and you can reasonably expect to make $40,000, $50,000 as a freelancer, you're going to be doing well, okay? And average starting salaries, I'm not exactly privy to that information, but it's not going to be, comparable to something an engineer, a scientist, or a computer data analysis or something like that, or electronic engineer. They're going to make a lot more money. Goes without saying. So. You need to know what that average salary is so that you can make some, good decisions on how much debt you're going to incur, okay? So before we go into debt, the second point beyond what the average salary would be is to know what the tuition is and actually project what you anticipate paying. So a listed tuition on a website. It's not always what we're going to pay, obviously. There's going to be perhaps some scholarships thrown at you, merit-based or otherwise, that will lower the actual sticker price of the tuition. But for the most part, that tuition is pretty accurate, okay? And I'm not talking about any sort of financial aid. I'm just talking about if it's a $50,000 a year or a $7,000 a year school. You need to look at that and then project, can you reasonably get done in 4 years? So if you're taking on a school, you're going to a school and you're taking on $50,000 a year in tuition, if you get out in 4 years, you're looking at a $200,000, financial investment in your career. That's a lot of money for photography and photojournalism. I will not hold back and tell you that I think that is going to be a very confining and restricting anchor on your career, especially for the first 10, 15 years, if not longer, as you attempt to pay off that debt and get your life and career going. Do you want to have a family? Do you reasonably expect or even want to own a home? Do you want to travel a lot? These are lifestyle choices that will be, severely impacted by how much debt you incur in school, again, undergrad or graduate. So what is that tuition sticker price? I teach at a state school. I went to a state school. My son went to a state school. It was right. We picked the right programs for myself and my son. And it was a very reasonable, financial investment. There are some private schools, here in LA that I'm familiar with. I was offered to teach a course at LMU, Loyola Marymount, a couple years ago as an adjunct. It sits up on a hillside overlooking Marina Del Rey, a very prestigious part of Los Angeles, very expensive. The tuition as listed on the university is between $50,000 and $60,000 a year. After speaking with the professor, I politely declined the offer, which is, not unusual. I don't want to teach at a place where the students are literally taking on $50,000 a year in tuition in a photography program. That just wasn't for me, especially once I talked to them and I learned a little bit more about what they wanted me to do and so forth. So again, every student can make their own choice. It is LMU is a private Christian school, Catholic school, and there's private institutions and public institutions all over the country. Here in California, we have the CSU system, California State University system, and then the UC system. One is not better than the other. They have different purposes. UC mostly for research and data analysis type of careers, a lot of science, obviously, and the CSU is more for professional careers, things like photography and not just the arts, obviously, but teaching and education and all sorts of kinesiology and so forth. So you need to pick the right school for your career, no doubt, but definitely please look at the tuition and what it costs and see if you can find one that will not amount to an unreasonable financial investment for your career, given what projected salary you'll probably make. Okay, if you're going into your career. Now, if you're going to go through photography and then you're going to go get your MFA and you're going to go straight into higher education and teaching, which many people do. I've taught several MFA students that are teaching already. Then obviously you're going to earn a higher salary as a professor with a terminal degree, as they call it, a MFA or a PhD. Okay, so if that's your goal, then perhaps that makes more sense. If your goal is to actually make your living full time as a photographer, then seriously consider how much money you're putting in to your degree, and maybe evaluate that against lesser schools that charge lesser tuition. That, of course, leads to taking on debt. It's a huge financial consideration for anybody, but particularly for younger people that might not have the financial wisdom and experience that comes from life, right? So this is a huge decision, how much debt you take on, and it's going to have repercussions throughout your life. That debt has to be paid off each and every month, and hopefully, if you don't take on too much debt, you can do that relatively early in your life. Otherwise, it's going to go on and on and on, and it's going to follow you for many years, and it's going to impact your life, perhaps in how you choose to, or who you choose to work with. Perhaps you're going to take any job that comes along because you have to, and I totally get that. You got to pay your debt. But if you don't have that debt obligation at that level, perhaps you can turn down bad contracts and bad offers because you don't have that same level of, well, I have to do this no matter what. Okay, so again, that's how it can impact your professional career and your life. So if you're taking on $200,000 in debt for a photography degree, $150,000, I even say anything over $100,000, I would say be very, very, very careful and approach things with a deep analysis before you engage in that, okay, before you sign on the dotted line. Fourth thing I'd like to mention is when you're looking at a program is really look hard at the faculty. Look at their bios as listed on the university. Look at their, accomplishments, obviously, which a university is going to highlight. But try to do a little bit of research outside of the university website. Okay, look at their personal websites. Google them. Look at what they partake in, where they've worked or where they've impacted the profession. Okay, so that you have a good understanding of all those that can potentially teach you within that program. I mean, that's what you're signing up for. You're signing up for an education, so you should know who's going to educate you. it should be a diverse faculty. It should be a faculty that has recent and relevant experience within the profession, because our profession, particularly photojournalism, has evolved rapidly over the last few years. So if you have a faculty that is heavy on academic research and heavy on working within the walls of an educational institution, but not as much recently in the perhaps 3, 5, 7, 10 years of the profession, hopefully there will be adjuncts or others that have been recently hired that bring a more relevant, recent, and practical experience into the classroom, because I find that to be extremely important for my students. Okay, so we can learn from everybody, whether or not they have been a professor for 25 or 30 years or a couple of years, but it should be a mix, because if you're being taught primarily by those that have been inside higher education for 20, 25, 30 years, they might not be as tuned in to how the profession actually works today. Okay, so look at the faculty and look at their bios and compare those with the schools that you're interested in. Again, that applies to undergrad or grad work. Last but not least, I think you should ask for a list of students that have graduated the program in the last few years. If you don't want to ask for it, ask around with friends and colleagues, ask on social media, take a look at alumni pages or something, or alumni, Facebook pages, or on Instagram, or any place where you might find that people from a particular program gather. Talk to them. Find out where the institution excelled. Find out where they came up short, because no place is going to be perfect. And I think the more information you have about perhaps where they come up short, you might be able to fill in those gaps personally through mentoring or finding some workshops and so forth and so on, conferences, to gather that information that you will need going forward into your career. Okay, so, and particularly if you talk to recent students, they might endorse it emphatically. There's a great program, great faculty, great support, and cost effective and so forth. Okay, that should obviously help you make your decision. On the other hand, they might say, listen, I paid a lot of money and I don't really feel like I got trained the way I need to be trained, or they didn't open enough doors for me, or, anything along those lines. So it could come from either side of the spectrum. But it's really relevant when you're taking on such a financial obligation that you get references. Okay, so speak to people about, their experiences, people that have come through that program in the last few years. Okay, so there's a few things to consider with higher education and the costs involved with, getting a degree in our profession. I hope it helps. Stop back by, and I'll see you again soon.